live here on Plus One EXP's Roll for Content channel. My name is Tony Vicenda. I'm Chief Alchemist here at Plus One EXP, and we're a weird little brand that multi-classes in tabletop game design, beard and skincare alchemy, and the Bardic College of Content Creation. Our hope and desire really is to help amazing designers find great players who love their games and help amazing players find great designers whose games they can love. And we do that in a lot of different ways. One of my favorite ones is to sit down with designers whose work I love, who have projects coming up I'm excited about, and talk to them about what went into that project and the work that they do. Today we're sitting down with, and I just got in my head about it, Brian, the Brian Tyrrell, to talk a little bit about Dungeons on a Dime and their upcoming Carved in Stone project. Brian, rather than me tell people a bunch of details about you that I will invariably get some of wrong, why don't you tell people a little bit about who you are, what you do, where they can find you online?
Hopefully I can remember all of it. Hi, I'm Brian. I use he, him pronouns. I run Dungeons on a Dime. Fancy name. I have a live show, Beast Fables, where I play as tiny beasts in a massive Scottish forest. I am based in Edinburgh, but I'm from England. I've been making role-playing games. Well, I've been playing them since I was like 10, and I've been making them for the past 4-ish years now. Damn. Pandemic.
Awesome.
And yeah.
Last time we talked a little bit specifically about how you got into this, because you were on a couple of weeks ago where you were talking about the Apothecaria project, but there was some stuff in that hit me really strong, which also leads us into exactly where we're headed today anyways, and that is that you got into Dungeons and Dragons because I believe you were playing Dungeons and Dragons with the other children of the historical reenactors that your parents were friends with. Historical reenactors in the U.S. is a very different thing than historical reenactors in the U.K. and different parts of the U.K. For people who aren't familiar with what that is, because it is going to matter later, tell us a little bit about what that is and what that looks like.
So historical reenactment in the UK is typically about the emulation of a period of time. That includes dressing up as people from that period of time, speaking as they did, acting as they did, in a way of reliving the past. There's lots of different forms. Some of them are more physically involved than others. I was involved in like a mid-ground. It's like LARP, but it's just historical role play. I was a little page boy in a manor. I would do this for 2 weeks. I would live in a tent. Everyone, there'd be like 200, 300 people living on this old Tudor, so 1500s manor, pretending as if King Henry VI was still alive, or King Henry VIII even was still alive, and gossiping about like, oh, he just killed his wife again, and drama. Going around, some people would work in like farms. I worked in the Great Manor. There were people who worked in the woods, and you just make a whole place come to life. But there's also more like slightly more modern forms of roleplay where like people get dressed up in plate mail and bash each other until someone falls over.
Awesome. Now I have a question. Did everybody live in the fields, or if you were role playing as somebody of higher society, did they let you stay in the actual manor or somewhere else nearby that was more permanent?
So an actual family owns the manor. It's called Kentwell, and they actually live in the manor full time. So all of the reenactors would go live in a field that used to have sheep in until like the week before you arrived. Even the rich people, in air quotes, but the people who were playing the rich people got to be in the manor all day and swan around in like pearled dresses and be like, oh yes, place it there and bring me my sweetmeats and stuff like that. And
awesome.
Pretend they were better than you, but they still did washing up like everyone else did at the end of the day.
So there was some classism, but not as much. But there was absolutely, definitely a hereditary hierarchy that ruled the roost in that space, which probably some good vibes for it.
So it's interesting. It was all voluntary classism. Everyone was opting in to role play this in the way that, like, if you're playing D&D, you want to play an urchin, then you get discriminated against for being an urchin.
Right.
But you volunteered for that. So to some degree, everyone's consenting. And at the end of the day, people take off those roles and they go back to wearing like Crocs and swanning around eating porridge or something.
And trying to not step in sheep, leavings. And so, yeah, that's, I know. I mean, like,
their best.
That's awesome. And we're going to talk a little bit about why that matters, specifically with your new Carved in Stone project in just a little bit. But for people who aren't familiar with Dungeons on a Dime and the work that you do and a lot of the different things you've done, because you've had some absolutely phenomenal titles. Your Virtue and Vice, which I'd love to talk about a little bit, is one of my, I still need to order that products because it's ended up so beautiful. It caught my eye. Was it last Zine Quest that was, or was it right before that?
no, it was so it was this time last year.
This time last year.
I was wanting to do it for Zine Quest 2019, but I missed it, and I was like, I'll just do it in like September. So it was September last year, and it fulfilled like February-ish this year.
It's so gorgeous. I want to talk about it just
I immediately went on and did Zine Quest for Scurry in like that same February, and I was just like, let's go.
But let's talk specifically about the core kind of concept behind Dungeons on a Dime, because it is you've done a number of publications at this point in time. We'll talk about Scurry, we'll talk about Virtue and Vice, we're going to talk about Carved in Stone. But what's kind of the ethos behind what you're trying to do and the core offerings that you kind of put out over time?
In a word, it has to be accessibility in every facet and every sector that it applies to. Accessibility in terms of a product, in that it helps people who have not got into role-playing as a hobby get into role-playing as a hobby. Like it's in the name, it's Dungeons on a Dime. It's accessible in terms of price, in terms of content, but it's also accessible behind the scenes in the production of the products, that as many people can use it as possible. It's also accessible in the work that it's providing. I try my best to work with entry-level creatives and small names so that they get to platform themselves with projects that help them move on into bigger work and step into the creative fields they're interested in. And that's, what Dungeons and Dimes is all about.
I love it. So you have put out a number of kind of like digital zines as well as a print zine. There are kind of these Dungeons on a Dime issues that have different elements you can pull out and just drop into any game. And then you had Virtue and Vice, you have Scurry, and you're going to be doing a new project called Carved in Stone. Tell us a little bit about Virtue and Vice. We talked a lot about Scurry last time, so I want to hit some of the other stuff that we didn't. By the way, I keep on saying last time, if you missed it, we had Brian and Anna on a little while ago to talk about Apothecaria last month, and it was a combination of Apothecaria. Like, it's hard to say those out loud and have people get the pun. Apothecaria is a combination of Scurry and Apothecaria by Anna that you'll kind of merge together and just crowdfunded. But let's talk a little bit more about some of the other things you've done. So what is Virtue and Vice for people who aren't familiar with the game?
So Vice and Virtue.
That's what I meant.
Vice and Virtue. Virtue and Vice is essentially a game aid. It bolts onto any role-playing system, and it's a way of generating essentially short scene prompts and getting everyone at the table to think about how they're role-playing their characters more. And it comes with some very light mechanics that allow you to essentially award, in like a Dungeons and Dragons term, like inspiration points or small boons to players to help them role play in one of three ways that they want to with the character. If they want to lean into Vice, which is a very in the moment and a very immediate mindset. If they want to be balanced between the two and be able to ask questions about what's going to be happening in the story so they can have better control over where the character goes. Or if they want to be in Virtue, thinking of the situation around them and taking a step back from everything for more kind of clarity.
That's awesome.
So it's adventure generation, and it's helping people get into roleplay.
Awesome. What kind of led you to this project? Was it just seeing that people oftentimes will bemoan alignment systems or other stuff like that, because oftentimes the way we play our characters doesn't in any way, shape, or form perfectly match any system someone's put together. And it also doesn't particularly encourage role play unless you're going to put a lot of things on rails and try to force a player into something. Was it just a desire to see something more organic arrive at the table, or were there other things that kind of went into seeing this project come to life, or wanting this project to come to life?
It was looking to make tools that helped people who are not comfortable with role playing have a framework to go with. I mean, a role-playing game is essentially just a set of rules that everyone agrees to follow to tell a story, which is why you can play role-playing games with strangers, because everyone's agreeing to the same rules. However, role-playing with strangers is difficult because you're not actively talking about what kind of story you want to tell. You're just like, oh, I hit the orc, or I run over there, or I cast a fireball. And it makes it awkward. It is, in a literal sense, you're not communicating like tone, consent, what you want, what you don't want. And to some degree, various tools I've seen so far about that, while necessary, can also dampen the like momentum you have going into the story. If you actually say, in the same way that, like, if you try to set up a board game at a party, it's like 3 hours of setup. While that is necessary for everyone to know the rules, it also slows things down and stops people from immediately jumping in. I wanted to try and make a tool that was helping people think about their characters and talk about themes they wanted to explore while also having a little bit of mystery, a little bit of excitement, and having the players have more agency over the story than just here's the DM, here's the thing they've set out. If not everyone's on the same page, then it's a bit of a mess.
Awesome. No, I love that. One of the board games we designed, like, it's a phenomenal, like, upbeat, moves quickly, everything's great, and then when you get to the end, you got to do a lot of math to count up your score. Not only because you've accumulated a lot of cards over the entire thing, and it was always like the hit point. I'm like, man, I really wish, like, I'm not an Appifying person. I'm like, but I do wish, this is one moment where I wish, like, we just had a digital way to be like, hey, this is what you scored the entire time when you hit this button, and it calculates and just sends everybody a text or whatever. And it's like, here's what you got, right? Because it is like, because usually it's a game that people will play multiple times, but then like there's just this kind of slow down moment, right? And so I think safety tools, when they're not done well, oftentimes feel that. But even when they are done well, like hitting the X card at a table, which people should do, is something is intended to stop the momentum of a game. And then if you're in a and I think because you can be in a really good flow, it causes players to hesitate and say, should I hit that right now? Because I like a lot about what's going on, but I don't like this element and it's really bothersome for me, or just not knowing if it's appropriate. So it's having more tools that kind of more organically can lean into that. Could you maybe give us a little example of maybe what that might look like for something? And if not, it's okay. I totally sprung this on you and did not prep you to answer.
Oh, no, it's fine. I actually talk about safety tools and give examples of different safety tools, basic ones, in the book itself, because as I was writing it, I was thinking, how can I make this a workflow that makes all of the stages easier and give appropriate times for these tools to be used when applying to any system of rules.
I'd love to hear an example.
So the workflow, or like the way that Vice and Virtue helps you structure stories, is you start a scene. A scene is any lengthy set of tasks. It could be climbing a mountain, it could be a single fight, it could be an argument, it could be navigating a ballroom. It's like a good narrative chunk. You know, like, oh, we're starting something significant. You start a scene. You draw one of 7 cards. You get a fortune that you read to the players. The players have a cryptic clue about what could be coming up in the scene that either you've prepared or you've drawn from one of the many random tables that are supplied. And then you continue with the story. This slight natural pause, a couple minutes, gives people a chance to say, oh, actually, you've got a fortune here that says spiders. I'm not really up for that. Could we have a different fortune? Or we've got some options. I want to choose this one because I think it's more exciting. So that's a good moment for people to chime in. Then you just play the game as normal. You've got this scene in the back of your head. You've got this idea of, I know that my character wants to kind of lean this way or go that way. You play as normal. And then at the end of the scene, when there is a good resting point, it might not necessarily be the same game. It might be the next game. But you can also do it in one shots as well. But at the end of that scene, everyone reviews their character's actions and thinks about, oh, you know, this is how I was feeling. The theme of the scene is revealed, and people can go, oh, actually, I was acting really in the moment there, or actually, I think I was taking a step back. I identify with some of these words here. I was virtuous, or I was acting with vice. And that active reflection also helps people talk about aspects of the story that they really enjoyed or really didn't enjoy. And that, again, helps bring up an opportunity for safety tools to naturally come into play that isn't just saying, oh, I'm uncomfortable, here's an X card, or making people feel that they're interrupting by using safety tools. A big word that I had in my mind was permission when I was writing this. I wanted to give people permission to be able to use different tools, permission to role play, permission to be safe when they did it, permission to talk about the story. And I hope that with the rules and the structure that I did that.
Yeah, no, I love that, because I think we oftentimes, like, I talk a lot about, and I've become a little bit obsessed with, probably in the last 6 months, even more so, how we develop culture of play around the table, because we talk a lot about the necessity of that. And I don't necessarily know that there's even, like, I'm not looking for somebody to write a book on it, though. If somebody is, like, I think we're always most comfortable, because we are game players and designers, are saying, if you give me a game that helps me create a better play culture, that's actually more helpful than if you give me GM techniques on how to do it, though some of that may just be GM techniques. That's fine. I always think it's helpful to be able to say, here's the thing we're going to play that's going to help make your table better, and give everyone more tools to know what they can do. Like, permission is such a huge part of that. I love that articulation. Like, I am a big fan of actual empowerment. I have a hard time when people in authority talk about trying to empower people below them, because there's some weird toxic dynamics that reinforce power structures there a lot of the time, actually.
Yeah.
I create SRDs for all my games, and they're all open license, not because people need my permission to design something that's like one of my games, but because I want them to have no lack of clarity that they absolutely have it here. Go nuts, go wild. I want you to do that. And I think anytime you can put out tools, whether that's in play or in design, that say, no, I am not only giving you permission, but I am encouraging you to go do this thing. I think those things go hand in hand. And I think a lot of people see them as somehow oddly restrictive, or I somehow see them as oddly freeing. Because like there's weird things around safety that kind of mirror around that. So being able to just drop it into play and explore that in a gamified way, I think is tremendous. I popped over to Floating Chair Club because it's something I keep on meaning to buy, and went ahead and put it in my cart so I can check out as soon as we're done, because it is one that I saw it. I was like, oh, I really want that. I don't know if I can do it right now. And then it released, and I was like, oh, I should really get that, because it's like 4 times more beautiful than even the original pitch was, and it looks phenomenal. And I knew Floating Chair had it in the U.S. People can get it over on your side in UK, Europe also too. But
all of the books come with gold foiled cards. So the cards actually have the Vice and the Virtue themes. You can literally shuffle them, draw them, and then lay them out, and they have keywords around the edges as well to help people associate with the theme of the scene that was going on.
Yeah. And let me see if I can.
It's really pretty.
Yeah, like the whole people who haven't seen it, I know I popped up some stuff from your website earlier. Like, it is just an absolutely gorgeous visual and like product also, and the table presence is just so impressive that I just can't imagine not owning it for a number of reasons. But I am super excited about it, and it's been on my list to get over and over again. So not 100% what we came to talk about, but again, I just thought it was such a great product. I've loved the execution on the entire time, and I need to get it actually so that I can dive into it and get excited about it. Yeah, toolkits for play are a huge part of what I love. Anytime we can create a ritual or create a space of play or create a toolkit that helps reinforce just good table culture, I think it's an absolute win. So I'm super excited about it. And then we had Scurry, which was one of my favorite projects from Zine Quest 3. For a number of reasons, but I actually remember actively, like, on stream, like, I have a pretty solid rule. We watch a minute of a video. We only watch a minute of a video unless that video is incredibly well done. I think we watched all the way through the Scurry video, because there's whether it's you or somebody on your team or whoever it was, it does a really good job of it. The key moments where you need to re-engage or shift, doing things about 2 seconds before that, so you never even have the mental space to think, should I click away or stop watching this or whatever? Like, it immediately goes into, hey, as soon as you start getting like, okay, I don't know how much narrative I want to listen to, you jump straight to, here's what's in the book. And then as soon as you're like, okay, that's great, what's in the book, you're like, here's one more thing, like right before you have the moment to do that. It was incredibly well done, and has one of my favorite graphs of any graph in all of Kickstarter history on it also too. But that's all craft stuff, right? That's all marketing stuff. Tell people a little bit about Scurry and what it was, though. Or what it is.
So Scurry so in context, I run a live show with my friends called Beast Fables, where one day, about a year and a half ago, maybe 2 years ago, oh God, it's a year and a half ago now. It doesn't feel like it. Time has flown. We just, in a Discord chat, were like, hey, what if we just roleplayed as tiny animals on an adventure? And that evolved into a show called Beast Fables, where we're small animals in a massive forest in Scotland, in a post-human future. Humans have been long gone. They're called Titans. We have no idea what happened to them. And you're just little animals living your little animal lives. And we kept coming up with a really common problem, which was every time we tried to do a one-shot, a single session of a game because someone was away, it would turn into a 4 or 5 or 10 session game because we just loved the stories that we were telling. And I found that the system we were currently playing with, Adventures on a Dime, I had written, and I had written it in a way to tell short stories and long stories, and we love telling long stories. So I needed a system that was short, that got to the point, it was over, so we could play if someone was sick or someone had to go away or wouldn't be there for the game. We could just play a short little session, a short little game, and it would be over. There was could not continue. We could play another game of it, we could play another session of it, but like, it was it. So Scurry is that. It's a single session, roughly 2-hour-long game where you start with a large die, a D12, and every time something goes wrong, the die starts to shrink. Everyone's rolling the same die to try and succeed on their skill checks. But as the die shrinks, the chance of success gets lower and lower. And that means more bad things happen and more die, and the dice gets even smaller. And if the die shrinks from a D4 into nothing, the game's over and something awful happens. So it's tension racketing up to a photo finish or a really climactic end. And it's over in 2 hours.
That's awesome. And it also had one of my, because I'm somebody who makes beard balm that is inspired by tabletop tropes, and so I'm a big fan of sensory and aroma engagement. Specifically, y'all created a set of candles that went along with this that are also compatible, from what we talked about last time, with a number of other systems. If you want to burn these candles while you're playing any RPG, you absolutely can. It'll work with any system you want to use. But just some really cool things around the project that I really love. But they were designed to help basically be a visual timer.
They were
for the game
3
also.
custom-scented candles, tea lights, for each of the 3 adventures that comes with the book. So there was a 3-part campaign, so you could play in 3 parts with different friends, and you could have effects that move from episode 1 to 2 to 3. And the concept was, because it was still in the middle of lockdown in the UK, was that you could send these tea lights to your friends and that everyone could light them up at the same time and then have this aroma and the shared experience while you're all playing on a VTT. It was me thinking of how could you connect people over long distances with a shared experience that wasn't just a computer. And I've had some great feedback from people who have played with Scurry, and I'm going to be bringing some of those candles to Thought Bubble this weekend with Willowix, who made them for me.
Awesome. Such great things, and I love when people do really specifically creative things that tie into their game, but also are thinking outside of that bubble of, hey, here's what people normally do. Like I love getting dice. It's not usually something that makes me click up a level unless I really love that backer, and let's happen to be like really exquisite dice. I love the really weird creative thing that somebody's like, we love this, and this is a thing that you can bring into your game, or even sometimes not, that just represents something that maybe is in the game world that you'll never see on another Kickstarter project. And not to say we'll never see candles on another Kickstarter project. I'd love to see more of that kind of stuff happening. But specifically the ability to centrally engage everybody at the same time, I think is such a huge thing. But the art on the entire book for Scurry, the creative process around the entire thing, was just so tremendous. So like it was such a well executed project, so well thought out, and people rave about it constantly. Like I haven't not got a chance to play it yet, but it has been such a strong response from people who do it. And even like Sir Heckalot in the chat is very excited about the project also too. So a lot of fans out there. But last time we talked about the historical reenaction. We talked about Scurry, we talked about Apothecary, we talked about a lot of things. But we did talk about specifically the fact that currently you are working on a brand new project, which is called Carved in Stone. So for people who haven't heard about it yet, or who have but maybe don't know all the details, tell us a little about what Carved in Stone is, which is going to be coming up later this month on Kickstarter. Is that the plan?
This weekend, 2 days.
This weekend, 2 days while you're at the con, you're going to be handing out the cards saying, click here right now, go ahead and type in your credit card information.
Please support me. Yeah. So Carved in Stone is going to be a system agnostic setting guide for Scotland's Pictish people. It's that's pretty much it. It's ideal for players, for historians, for enthusiasts of all ages, and it will be coming with a printing of Adventures on a Dime. So there's a system that comes with it, so that it's all inclusive, but you don't have to play that system. It's that part of the book. The setting is system neutral.
Awesome. And just like everything you do, it's absolutely gorgeous. But you mentioned earlier, like accessibility is a huge part of what you do, and bringing in different voices is also a huge part of what you do. So let's talk a little bit about that with this. I want to dive into some of the specifics in just a minute. And if it's all right with you, I mean, I popped up the preview page so people get a little bit of a sense. I'd love to even watch the video because I'm a huge fan of the Scurry video. But do you want to do that? Do you want to watch the video first? We can come back and talk about accessibility. Is that good? I mean, we're going to be sitting right here either way, but let's
watch the video. It is, I'm so proud of it.
You won't be able to hear it at all, so I'll just tell you when it's done.
I'll just be like
done.
Quick blows the wind, whispering over the northern sea. Black boats catch it in their canvas sails, dragging tired sailors from harbour at Burghead out to the conquered Orkney Islands. Travellers pick their ways east, through the wild marshes and stony hills, their minds laden with rumours of faraway lands. This may sound like the opening scene of a fantasy adventure, but it's a real piece of Scotland's rich and diverse history. With Carved in Stone, you'll be able to go on daring adventures through dramatic highlands, exploring the ancient Pictish kingdom of Forthrue, its neighbours of Dalriata, Altclud and beyond. The system-agnostic setting guide introduces all of the major information you'll need to know to tell stories in Scotland, compatible with all role-playing game systems such as Dungeons & Dragons. Through an easy-to-parse layout, you'll hike through the depths of Scotland's moss-filled rainforests, see which plants and animals could have been found, and get a better understanding of the complex social lives of the Picts. We're proud to bring together some of Scotland's leading archaeologists with a host of queer, marginalised and disabled voices to dispel misconceptions of the past with exciting new resources. The past doesn't belong to any person or publisher. So, once completed, we're planning to give this entire project away for free. In addition to our community box of free books, we hope this helps new players explore the past in ways they couldn't have imagined before. Carved in Stone will be crowdfunding for 30 days from the 13th of November 2021. Help us bring Pictland to life for players across the world by backing us on Kickstarter.
All right. Absolutely, just like the last one, absolutely gorgeous video, just like incredibly well done. Even as I was watching, like I had totally spaced, and you had told me this already. I totally spaced on the fact like y'all are doing this crowdfunding to make it, and then it's just free. Like this is not like this is not Brian's path to thousands of pounds or anything like that. This is you're like, hey, we want to work together with a phenomenal group of people to make something that really represents the richness of this history, and then we want to give that away because this history belongs to all of us. And I think the way you're approaching that is absolutely phenomenal. I'm super thrilled to chat a little bit more about that. I know I kind of alluded like the historical reenacting part at the very beginning, but like this is something for you that I've seen you be very passionate about, like the land that you live in, as well as the people who lived there, the history across the board. Tell us a little bit about what stirred this project in you initially.
So it's funny because I said that accessibility is like the core thing, and it feels like it's everything. It's a thread that goes through every single story of my creative journey. So the narrator was Jeff from the Society of Antiquaries of Scotland. And he originally contacted me about, do you want to try and do some work together? He's the archaeological consultant side of things, and he's helping really verify a lot of the information in this project. He contacted me because I applied for a social media job at the Society and they turned me down. But he was like, you can't run on social media, but you do D&D? That sounds cool. Why don't you tell me about that? And this is a year and a half ago. And we were chatting casually and then more seriously. And I was already speaking to Lizzie Simonon, who's a school outreach libraries assistant who essentially helps get books and resources to over 200 schools in Glasgow as part of an organization for the government. I was already talking with her about making an educational pack of role-playing resources to start and to seed role-playing clubs in schools. And together we three sort of culminated and said, we want to make something that helps kids and people role-play, that is free and that anyone can access. And from Jeff's side, perfect setting that helps communicate more accurate information about the Picts, who are very stereotyped as a people when we have a lot of new evidence coming out that radically changes our interpretation of who they were and how they lived.
Okay, so for anybody who's not familiar with the Picts, especially, let's say, Americans who are ignorant of everybody who lives anywhere else in the world besides them, unfortunately, tell us a little bit about who the Picts were and what this kind of the stereotypical perception of them has become, and then what maybe some of the new pieces that this is exploring also. That's a lot. I'll re-queue as we go. But.
Yeah. So if you're thinking of the Picts, you might be thinking of William Wallace and Braveheart and freedom and naked men wearing like woad and blue and stabbing Romans. Stabbing Romans, that was true. But that's the idea of these sort of like Scottish barbarians, the native peoples. And there's grains of truth through all of that, but a lot of it is dramatized by a very particular narrative that has dominated discussion of history. In reality, the Picts were a very multicultural people. They had trade as far as Asia. There's, burial mounds being discovered with silk in from this time period, showing that they had a very vast reach of who they were contacted with, who they were trading with. They knew about the world. There were 5 different kingdoms in Scotland at this time. There, vastly different peoples with social traditions and cultures. It wasn't a monoculture as people, or the conception is that it's just, the Picts and that was it. And they just, there's so much going on. I don't even know where to start.
No, I think that's a great articulation of a lot of the things within that. Like I think it's really easy anytime we talk about history, and this is kind of lead in. Like we do, for anybody who wants to know how the sausage is made, I don't do a ton of prep behind this, but it's meant to be conversational. So I do say, are there things you want to talk about? How would you feel if we talked about this thing? Like all those different pieces will come up into play beforehand, just because we want to have a sense of where the conversation's going, so that we communicate clearly to you, the audience. But one of the things was just talking about we oftentimes get encapsulated into one person's view of history, which eventually becomes a common cultural understanding of a historical moment, and it's rarely ever accurate to what that moment was actually like. And this has come up on stream even in the last couple of weeks in some very weird ways. Like we were having a chat while playing a game about nuns fighting the forces of evil, about the linguistic evolution of cultures, and how the fact that lots of blue is one of the last colors used, and it's not that people can't see blue or don't notice blue, but the language that they're using oftentimes is more rich, and isn't specifically geared towards communicating blue, because everybody would have known what that thing was, so no one's communicating it in a very explicit, we're going to use that word, but that shapes our oftentimes cultural understanding of those moments in weird ways and frames them in weird ways. And now we have the historical accounts we have of tons of different cultures and what they actually look like. And to a large degree, this book is about doing that. Like it's an RPG setting, but it's about going back and contextualizing the broadness of the culture at that point in time, specifically a lot of the voices that may not have been present at that moment in history. And I think that's a tremendous approach, or that were present at that moment in history, but are no longer represented.
Yeah, I was about to say, they were present, they've just been erased.
Yeah. And so talk to me a little bit about that, because I think it ties into the core of Dungeons on a Dime and what y'all do to be looking at the context around this moment and trying to say, let's explore these lost voices to that.
So often in history, again, a very particular narrative. It tends to be cisgendered. It tends to be white, male, and funnily enough, from military backgrounds in the UK, have a very particular view, and they perceive things through a certain lens. It's not saying that lens is worth any more or less than any other perspective, but because it's the only lens that a lot of history has been seen and written through, it tends to both portray and then also direct how we think about the past to fit a certain standard, a certain lifestyle. And we just don't know if that's true. Interpreting history is sort of like a razor's edge, because you're kind of straddling the line between, we don't know if this was true, so we're not going to confirm or say it could have happened, we're just not going to assume. But then also, we don't have evidence that it didn't happen, so it's possible it could have happened. And so often, a lot of marginalized peoples, disabled people, queer people, their lives, someone looks at a skeleton, and you can't necessarily at a glance say, it was this person queer, are they straight, what was their idea of gender, all of these very social concepts. You look at bones, immediately you can't see that, but through context you can understand it and get an image of it. But because at first these perspectives, first of all, don't think about it in their own lives, and also don't want to see it for various reasons in their own lives, they say, well, there's no evidence that's literally smacking us in the face, so it didn't happen.
Right.
When with this project, I want to push it in the other direction of, well, actually, there's no evidence saying it didn't happen. And our understanding, we can't project what we think of gender, of sexuality, of race back onto the past. We need to rethink things and have new perspectives and see what this new light shines and reveals.
Yeah. No, I love that, because it is like I said, I mentioned to you right before, I oftentimes am people when they're doing representations of history, which I think is a good thing overall, will oftentimes present it as it is more valid, but there's also no substantive proof that it happened, and that's a really hard thing for me, because I'm like, that's contradictory, because you're like, it's not the enjoyment of saying we know this could have happened. Like we see this as a possibility, and here are the reasons we see this as a possibility, and here are the reasons we think that maybe it didn't make it into history books, and that could be the people writing, the fact that sometimes commonplace things just weren't documented because they were commonplace, and we don't have archaeological records to suggest one way or another, but we do have these moments mentioned in literature that suggest these larger things. Like, those are all important and valid things, and being able to draw from those and then create this solid articulation of what is my experience as somebody who, and when I say my experience, I'm speaking as pretty much anybody besides me, somebody who is not the primary voice of history, right? Like, I, as a white straight male, like, I enjoy the fact that most of history is written in the perspective of people who were like me, to at least an anthropological level in some demographics. But even within that, like, there's so much lost from there. There's so much missing from there. And so talk to me about some of the accessibility that y'all are working into this, and how some of the voices that you've gathered for this are specifically designed to help explore that in kind of that razor's edge way that you were talking about.
So I think I'm going to stick with perspectives, and the idea that perspectives that we have today just can't hold a candle or be compared to the perspectives that happened in the past. Today, the last 30, 50 years, we've been raised to set as the standard this idea of very binary male, female, gendered roles, this sort of thing. And we don't know if the Picts or if other previous cultures lived like that. Throughout history, around the world, we see that an idea of gender is vastly different wherever you go, and very rarely is it actually just a simple, oh, this is what men do, this is what women do. There's archaeological evidence that shows that assigned female at birth people and assigned male at birth people were buried in ways that fit roles that we now today think of as male or female, but there's crossover. There are what we say are assigned female at birth, AFAB warriors, people who are buried with their armor and their weapons and are buried in what other warriors are buried like, but we don't know if they were transgender, if they were women who were considered equals in a sense of like men and women fight, or if it was only a men's role, but women could be transgender and become fighters, if what the relationship there is. So it's all about just finding as much information and not looking at it through a single lens, but instead getting as many people onto the project as possible to look at these different perspectives and go, okay, so it could have been like this, but also here's the basic raw evidence, make your own conclusion. And this is why we're so interested in it being a role-playing game. And this is why the Society of Antiquaries was so excited that we were doing role-playing games as opposed to just making a book. Because so often history has been textbooks and lectures, and here is my perspective, here is the evidence, here's how I've interpreted it. With a role-playing game, like any setting, you put the pieces on the table and you let people play with it. So what we want to do is to essentially both give permission for people to see themselves in history where they previously thought there was no place, but also say, here's what the evidence is, here's what we know, or at least we know for certain, here's what we don't know, and we're actively saying, we don't know this, play with these parts, see what you think makes sense, play with these stories, and put yourself in history. And we might be getting things wrong in the book. Historians always get things wrong. There's no way you can say anything for certainty. But by letting people have these conversations and talk about it more, we're helping keep it modern, keep it content. Losing my words. It helps people have a deeper conversation about the past.
No, and I love it. So I've showed a couple times already the preview document you have linked to the Kickstarter just alongside us as we've been talking. But like, y'all even do a good job, and it's in the video also too, because it's drawing from some of the same art. Like there's obviously, like, the Pictish are people from a certain region, from a certain ethnic and racial and skin tone background, but there's a lot of variation within that we don't think about. But there are people of color who are included within the artwork and the space. Also, it's not just like, hey, here's all the redheaded, fair-skinned, freckled, like whatever your pastiche kind
genetically,
of like,
if anything,
thought of the Scottish is. Yeah, go ahead.
Several fun facts. Genetically, if anything, they were more likely brunette than redheaded. The redhead gene, even today is extremely recessive, and so it's rare. But also they were most likely brunette from what the bones and research that's been done. But on top of that, Scotland, not just in the time of the Picts, the time we're looking at, the late antiquity and 7th century, but as far back as the Roman Empire, there were people of color moving through Scotland. There were Black Roman legionary soldiers settled in Scotland in the 2nd century, brought in from Africa because that's where they conquered and that's who they were trading with. Those roots were established. People of color existed in Scotland for thousands of years, as they have existed everywhere, obviously.
Right.
And there is no way to say for certain to what extent they lived there. I mean, there is evidence of Roman legions of African kilns at the very tip of Scotland. We don't know what kind of culture could have been passed down, what traditions would have mixed, how they would have settled. Because when the whole of the Roman Empire collapsed, the soldiers settled in Scotland. They didn't go home because they'd pretty much lived in Scotland their entire lives. Yes, the money dried up and no one knew was getting sent over, but there's no reason to go back to a home you've never been to.
Right. No, I like I said, it is, I think, such an important part because I think oftentimes when we've seen this type of depiction historically, when we've seen this type of depiction in media, it oftentimes feels slapped on because it's done clumsily, but it also is drawn from real historical events that were taking place in these points in history. It's not slapped on like it is a real thing. And being able to also explore that around the table and being able to look at a player and basically be like, there can be people who look like you, who act like you, who think like you, who are similar to you in this game. We're not going to force you into playing, a brunette Scottish person who has no cultural ties to anywhere else. The Picts were a diverse community, like most communities were at this point in history, and we're learning more and more about that all the time. But either way, come and be who you are in this space, and let's ask these questions together is, I think, the most important part of that. Like, what is being able to explore those things within this reality is such a great thing. And as we talk about, safety tools, as we talk about accessibility, as we talk about other things, like games are the best place in a lot of ways to be exploring these questions because we understand like that in the game state we're engaging in this hypothetical place and mode that allows us to safely ask these questions because no one is under the assumption that when we say, here's what our team of adventurers just did, that happened in history, right? We're saying that these are the types of things that could have happened in history to this type of group of people, and let's explore what that might look like together. And I think that's such a thrilling place to be because it's also gives the experience of activity in the same way that, living in a sheep field and then being a page boy gives a certain perspective on history. Like being able to sit around a table and pretending to be a Pict and looking at your background and having these conversations, questions, and other things like that is such a great way to do it. For people who are looking at this, because I think this is, it's such a tremendous undertaking. It's such a beautiful way to explore it. What are the types of adventures, right? Like, because I think that's immediate word for a lot of GMs. Like, okay, great, we're gonna play Picts. Like, am I just throwing a bunch of like magical cave witches into things? Like, what am I doing that makes this a fun game to play? How are we proceeding in this?
So there will be sections in the book about different ways of playing in this setting. All of the information that we're presenting is if you were role playing in Scotland. So it's not fantasy magic in the way that we think of magic.
Right.
I have sections drafted, for example, on like the ideas, like how people would have reacted to magic and how you can replicate that in game mechanics. So for example, if someone cast a spell on you, we as people know magic in the real world doesn't exist. Witches don't go bang and then lights. But the feeling of being inspired, listening to a true speech, that might give you advantage on a check, and how you can still use the mechanics of systems you're familiar with to explore what we would call a real time and place. Right. The kinds of adventures we actually have is a stretch goal because creating content is expensive. But we would love to hit it. We actually have a full adventure called Celebration of Blades. It's essentially what I call like a grand tour of the entire book. Everything that we cover in the book is then in the adventure as sort of like a showcase of different parts of history through active encounters. Essentially, King Breedy is king of Fortrue of the Pictish kingdom in the north of Scotland. And he conquered Northumbrian King Egfirth in a very famous battle, struck him down, won the kingdom, huge thing. And the smith who made his blade lives in your village and he's dying. So you have to go and get all of the grave goods, all of the party food, so that you can throw a huge wake for this smith who's very famous and is a friend of the king. And the king is coming, so you got to do it quick. You got to hurry up, got to get all good stuff, and got to get back in time. So it's sort of a round trip around the kingdom of Fortrue. And there are a bunch of different encounters that essentially showcase different parts of that society. So you can have diplomatic conversations, or even a raid if you want to, with the Christian monks who brew beer to the south. You're going to the port city of Berg Head, where you can try and trade for or rustle up some cows to bring back. Then you have wilderness survival. A lot of Scotland at this time was essentially temperate rainforest, 5-10 degrees, but wet and full of moss and difficult to traverse. If you're not in an active settlement, it's wild country. And so moving around to these different locations to fulfill these different quests is going to be hard, and that can be a really fun part of the campaign to explore. So it's road trip. Then you have to meet with the various different religious officials to try and build in all of the cool social communities and cultures and norms they had at that time. One that we've got is meeting with the Magi Druids of the place to bless grave goods, like a special dagger or a horn to be buried with the smith. And then also completing various social rituals that aren't magical or religious, but just things that people like. The Smith's Apprentice wants you to go to the forge where his master was trained and get a stone and bring it back. Normally, the smith would do this as a sign of passing on skills, but he can't. He's dying, so they need you to go do it. And you could just walk 5 feet away, pick up a stone, and say, "Here you go, it's done." And he wouldn't know. But it's the moral question of carrying on a tradition, actively ignoring it, forgetting to do it, and then it just fading from memory. Really engaging people with history, but also being fun.
That's awesome. No, it's super excited. The app, like I said, the art is all tremendously gorgeous also too so far. I love the way that the different pieces of the book are rendered. The layout is also super easy to read and well grouped, just in the sample that you have. I really can't wait to see what comes out of this project, because I'm always so excited by the beauty and the thoughtfulness that comes into every Dungeons on a Dime project I've seen. And everyone ends up being as excited as I am about it and as beautiful as they look, they end up being even better than I would think they would be. So you're constantly exceeding expectations for how well these things are put together. For people out there who are thinking about this stuff, because I think lots of times when we think about, okay, I want to create a game, and we think about here's an IP that I like an intellectual property. For people who are thinking about this, I know you were approached by an academic setting, but if somebody was interested in potentially reaching out about doing work like this for their region, for their area, what might be some tips you have for things that you've already learned about if they want to create a historical setting and work with an academic organization to do that, things they should be thinking about?
So it tends to be that with most heritage and archaeological organizations, heritage being more like the sites and tourism side of things, and archaeology being more of the academia, both of those industries are actively looking to diversify. I mean, the reason why they reached out to me was to say, hey, we want to try new approaches of getting information out there, and we also want to get away from the really old, musty narratives that we've got and get some new, fresh ideas in. So if there are charities or societies near you, especially if they are not huge, I'm not talking go to the V&A and say, hi, I want to make a role-playing game with some statues you've got. But go for your local groups and talk to them. They're more than happy to talk about everything they know. It's always ask. We when we've been working on Carved in Stone, the society's been very, very kind enough, the Society of Antiquaries that Jeff is from, the narrator, who have been kind enough to pay for consultations with archaeologists. So we've already been paying actual people in the field to go and do research and talk to us about what they know and stuff like that. So it's not, you won't get everything for free, but start with a question and it could start a project and you could go from there. People love to share information, and historians love to talk about history. I know that it sounds tautological, but the whole reason people study history is to share these stories. Storytelling is the oldest human tradition, and sharing history so that we don't repeat the mistakes and also learn from it is something that every historian that I know is excited about.
Yeah, I mean, we live in Philadelphia now, so we live in a very historic part of the U.S. And the area we live in is a area called the Wissahickon, and it's, you know, from a neighborhood standpoint, because we're Philly's made up of all these different sub neighborhoods. Like there's two kind of bigger neighborhoods that people know about. It's Wissahickon, the neighborhood we live in, is like 2 streets, but it's connected to like 13 miles of untouched wilderness right next to us. And like Poe has a travel log that he wrote when he was going through it, because he considered it the most beautiful part of the world. And so you can go out and you can find the mile marker for this piece of this travel log that he wrote, not a normal way that he wrote about that. And you can walk the path that he walked, right? And for me, that's always been like a rife, like, oh, and there's like an old hermit's cave out there also too. That's one of the first, I'm going to mispronounce it. One of the first like early occult sites within the U.S. That's literally like a 300-yard walk from our house. There's, we went and had pizza cooked by a local historical society in a 200-year-old clay oven that was like, you know, we paid $30. It was like bring your own toppings, but they had beer and wine, and they would just put it all on the pizza dough and toss it in for you, and they would cook it, and you got to have pizza cooked in a 200-year-old dome clay oven. But it was their way to get people in. They're always looking for those things, and they're super excited to talk about history. So, you know, I'm not interested in making a colonial era game, but if I wanted to, I absolutely know locally there are people I could reach out to who would be 100% thrilled to explore that project together.
This is it just reminded me, one of the things we kind of joked about but also want to happen when we were very first, me, Lizzie and Jeff were talking about the project, was we wanted to have school kids be able to go on like castle visits and go, oh, I know that building, I stabbed a goblin in there, and oh, we had a raid, and oh, we actually set that building on fire, and to have like actual lived experiences, so to speak, in these places where they had met with, you know, made up people, but like they would have a connection to these places where if you went there without that, they just go, oh, it's just another wet rock. Fun, thanks, I guess.
Yeah, I love that. And I also think it's such a good way to ground people in history while continuing to explore a broader idea about what history is, what it has to teach us, and the voices that are not present in the way that we're currently exploring the mode of history, which I think are all tremendous feats. And we, you know, like my mom is a long-term educator, has a doctorate in education, teaches other people how to be educators. And one of the things we'll constantly talk about, like, we're still learning so much about the way that people learn, about the way that people take in information. But one of the things we do know is that the desire to learn is one of the biggest indicators about whether or not you will. And so things like this, I think, have such a tremendous impact for young people to take something like history, which they may care about just off the bat, they may be very excited about, but if they're not, to create that personalized connection with that space, with that time, and to get them excited about that. So in addition, getting adults to think about things that they've assumed for years, but in a very different way, I think games are a great way to do that as well. So I'm super excited about it.
And it's not just mumbo jumbo. Like, there have been proper academic studies done about the educational benefits of role-playing games. Yeah. They prove it. There are links on my website if you want to go look at it. But specifically for teaching history as well, it helped people actively think through the problems these people had at that time and go, oh, maybe it wasn't as easy as I thought it would be. Or it's not like I could just hop in a time traveling machine and have my phone and I'll be fine. Like, there's all of these problems and considerations that change how we think about the past and how we think about the future.
Yeah. No, I'm like I said, I'm super excited to see it. I love seeing these types of unique projects pop up. Was super excited that it came up last time we were talking, which I know you weren't into, but like that, the connection to your connections to history and your love of that, I think are essential to seeing projects like this take place. I'm super glad to do it. Derek in the comments also said, followed the Kickstarter, very interesting stuff, and love that love what they've heard about your philosophy and the history of gaming as an extension of that. Thank you so much. For anybody who's watching out there right now, we would encourage you, I'm going to drop the link in again in just 1 second, but it's also in the descriptions as well. Go follow the Kickstarter, which goes live this Saturday. Also, if you're like, hey, I don't know if I can back it, I'm not financially at a place where I can right now, the best thing you can do, I always tell people, like, back it for $1 if you can. If you can't do anything, sharing it with other people who you know would be excited about this project, or just sharing it generally to let other people know the project's happening, is such a win for creators. I love seeing people share my stuff because I don't always know one-to-one if you've backed it. I do know typically if somebody has shared it online and they tag me in it. So I'd highly encourage you to share this project online if you have not had a chance.
Generally, sharing is very important. And we didn't touch on it, but it is mentioned in the video. After we finish this, we're giving the entire thing away for free. The Kickstarter is there to fund the creation of this content and to very specifically pay everyone fairly for their time. But history doesn't belong to any single person, and we want people to use these resources and to play with them. So we're hoping that we will be giving away all of the resources digitally for free. They'll be under a Creative Commons license. So the entire book, all of the illustrations, the layout, everything will be non-commercial, so that like clubs, schools can print them, make their own personal books, because it's sometimes cheaper just to print on your own printer and then staple it together than it is to buy a physical book. And then the text itself, so the information, the core of the book, will be a commercial creative license. So anyone can use it, make their own Pictish adventure, riff off, and have like sub stuff, whatever they want to do. It's out there to be remixed with. And we'll also be selling physical books to raise funds to, first of all, give books away to people who really need them, like libraries and clubs and societies, and then also to fund more books, more of this stuff in the future.
Awesome. Well, thanks everybody for joining us. A couple things we've got coming up next Monday. We've got our actual play of DungeonDelvers.tv with Keegan EXC, which I am super excited about. It's a game they've made. It's actually based on our house OSR system, but it is a post-dungeon future fantasy thing that basically fuses all the things we love and hate about video game streamers, Twitch, and other stuff with dungeon delving, and I cannot wait to sit down and to play this game with a bunch of great people on Monday night. We're going to be taking probably a week off, as I'm going to be out of town later on this month. Also, too, we've got some other great things coming up later this month, some more phenomenal interviews, community conversations. We're going to be playing with Zedek Sue at the end of the month and their brand new anthology of adventures. And we've got some Mothership content on the way also, too. So if you haven't gone to check out those great projects that are all live right now, please do. There's a ton of great things happening on Kickstarter. Can't wait to see this game go live and become a part of this great period of games that are getting funded right now. But with that said, this has been Prestige Class with Brian. And until next time, class is dismissed. We'll see you soon, everybody. Bye. We are clear. Except for everybody just heard me say we are clear because I hadn't muted myself yet. Love you, everybody. Bye.